Hi, Tony here again with another episode of All the Remote Things, and I've got Evan Leybourn with me. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Now that's a high energy for what are we, Thursday afternoon. So this is good.
Oh, well, I'm excited, and I'm excited to have you on. But Evan and I've known each other for quite some time. We've spoken on
Too long.
tickets together, around the time. Although I must say, and I'll get it out right at the beginning. He's looking very young, and it's making me feel bad. He's very clean shaven for the first time since I've ever known him.
First time since I was 16. Having a beard when you're 16 is great. Getting into bars, I don't really have that problem these days. So time for something fresh.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, while we're at it, Evan, it might be really great if you let everybody know a little bit about yourself.
All right. So Evan Leybourn, based here in less than sunny Melbourne, Australia, land of fantastic coffee, but terrible weather. For my sins, I run the Business Agility Institute. We're a global professional organization with members in 70 plus countries now. I've been doing this bloody thing we call business agility since about 2008-ish. And yeah, look, this is my passion. I'm doing what I love. And I've had a very varied career. My first job was dressing up in a koala suit. My second job was stacking shelves at the library, and my third job was satellite engineer. And so it shifts around from there. But with all of that, I'm loving what I'm doing here, helping organizations.
That's a brilliant intro, and it's a great segue into the Business Agility Institute, because obviously a lot of people know you from that. But I want to delve into it a little bit and say, okay, firstly, talk to us about how the Business Agility Institute came about. And I'll just preface that because, I've been doing the Agile thing for quite some time, along with a lot of people we know. When Agile came out, it was Agile. But the reality of it was then this business agility came about from the fact that Agile started to get scaled across organizations. And we reached that impasse where I think, just creating agility within teams was no longer what we needed. We were banging into the hard fibers, if you like, of governance and funding, etc. But you really took it to the next level. So chat about this, because it's interesting, because a mutual friend of ours, I believe, had something to do with it. So
yes. So as I mentioned, I've been doing broadly what we're talking about as business agility since about 2008, which was the first time I became an executive. So I was a techie. I was using Scrum and XP, and I won't tell you which side of the wars I was on. But back in 2003, 2004, and you're creating a potentially shippable product increment every 2 to 4 weeks. And of course, it sits in your staging environment until the ops team has a release window, which is, if you're lucky, every 6 months. So if we think about like Eli Goldbrat's theory of constraints, there's a constraint to agility. And in that case, it was ops. And that was the world we lived in at the time. Got to about 2008, I become an executive, a director. And to be blunt, I was a pretty crappy director, because the skill required to be an executive, or in fact a manager, is very different to the skills required to be a team lead or a developer or anything else. And no one taught me those skills. I just kind of assumed that because I could do X, I was good at being a director of X. Less so. My boss at the time pulled me into an office after about a couple of months of working. It's like, Evan, you got to pull your head in. If you stop being so arrogant, you're not going to last very long. I've never thought of myself as arrogant. And long story short, I learned the skills. But one of the things that occurred to me was part of the challenges that I was having was this thing that the problems we're having were collaboration, cooperation. I was doing this whole of government program. And how do you get 6 different government agencies to work in what I would now call multidisciplinary, cross-functional way? And that's when it's like, maybe this agile thing that I was doing as a techie might work here. And the short answer is it did. The longer answer is I was lucky because I did it badly, but it still worked nonetheless. And fast forward a couple of years, and I'm obviously figuring out what works, what doesn't work. I'm doing this, and other people are doing it as well. I'm not saying I invented the damn thing, but it gets to a point where I'm going to Agile conferences. I'm talking to Agile conferences about this thing called business agility and how important it is to link in your funding models or HR or just bloody operations into the process, because it doesn't matter if you can deploy every 11 seconds with DevOps if it's going to take you 4 months to hire the right person or 9 months to get through the project control board. Your agility is constrained by other factors. Now, after this was back in 2016, I was in Agile India. Great conference. In fact, I was there almost every year until COVID struck, and obviously
yes.
at that point. But I just finished my talk, and it was the end of the day, and I'm sitting there. I'm having a cup of tea with Ellen Grove, who is this Canadian coach, mutual friend of ours, absolutely fantastic person. And I'm ranting.
Shout out to Ellen.
Yeah, hey Ellen, hope you're listening. If you're not listening, someone will tell you. Anyway, so we're sitting down, and I'm just ranting and complaining. It's like everyone in the room is nodding their head, going, "Yes, this is what we need. We need this business agility," but no one can do anything. And I'm tired of talking to rooms of people who agree, but nothing changes. And so she kind of challenged me, and she was like, "Well, why don't you create a business agility conference?" And it's like, well, yes, that's a damn good idea. I'm going to do this. And this is not the Institute, by the way. This predates the Institute. So I'm living in Singapore. I ask a bunch of friends, like, "Hey, would you come to New York?" Don't ask me why I picked New York, literally 12 hours time zones away. Like, I could not get further apart if I tried. Anyway, so we sit, "Hey, would you come?" Yeah, about 20 people said, "Yeah, I'd definitely come to that." So I book a venue in Times Square. Again, don't ask me why. Foolish. I was lucky. It was a good outcome, but I wouldn't do it again if I had the choice. But we put on the Business Agility Conference, and of course, me being really bad with names, I just called it the Business Agility Conference. I should have called it something fancier, but that's me. Anyway, long story short, it was a huge success. Now, I somewhat arrogantly had assumed that I'd know everyone who attended. I've been talking business agility for, at that point, 7 or 8 years. So of course I'm going to know like most of the people in the room. No, I was wrong. I was bloody wrong. Maybe 20%. We had delegates from Portugal, from Jamaica, from Ghana. We had delegates from companies across the United States and Canada I'd never heard of. And it showed me that this was an idea whose time had come. This was an idea where I wasn't the only one frustrated by the narrow focus of the dialogue and the conversation that was happening. And yeah, from that, the Institute was born, and the rest is kind of history. Here we are.
Yeah, you had a couple of people join you as co-directors or your leadership of the Business Institute as well. So we should probably mention them as well.
So the truth is, I owe Dr. Ahmed Sidki a huge debt of gratitude. So I did start the conference, but I didn't finish the conference by myself. So about midway through the organizing, I'm in Singapore. I'm trying to organize a conference in New York. New York is not a cheap city. This is a very, very stressful moment. I mean, like there are times when I'm goes like, am I going to have to like mortgage my house to cover the bills? Do we have cash flow for this? And of the people I asked, the frustrating thing, of all the people I asked, would you come to New York and would you buy a ticket to this conference? None of them did, not one. Now, we did sell out in the end, but none of the people who sort of convinced me that I should put a stake in this actually showed up. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But Ahmed, IC Agile, president of IC Agile, and head of business agility, chief of staff for Riot Games. He came in and it's like, "Hey, Evan, I want to do more than just sponsor. Can we do this together?" And it's like, hell yes. I love what you're doing with IC Agile. I love what you're trying to create. I love your vision for education. So let's build this conference. And after the success, and we just loved working together, when it was like, hey, like, let's create something more. We don't want to run events. We're not an events company. We want to do research. We want to support the community. And he was like, let's do this. I'm in. And so he and I founded this back in 2017 now. And 5 years later, we're still going strong.
That's brilliant. And then where did Laura come into this? Laura Powers is the other leader of your group.
Laura joined us in 2020. So as we were growing, anyone who's listening who runs a startup, you know that it's held together with gaffer tape and string. And yep, the organization, in true Aussie fashion, we punch above our weight. We were in conversations with organizations not 10 times, 100 times, or 1,000 times our size. And we were being treated as equals. But beneath the surface, we're this like really messy hodgepodge of everything. So 2020 is like COVID's in mid-flight. And of course, we didn't know that. It's like, hey, COVID's nearly over. Another year to go. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But it's like, we've got to operationalize this damn thing. We've got to actually, like, what's that saying? The cobbler's children have the worst shoes, or no shoes, as the case may be. And we were definitely a bit of the cobbler's children. It's like we talk about these kind of organizations, and well, we had some of those elements. When you're a tiny org, it's you do what you have to do. So we brought her in, and it's like, can you help us like clean this organization up, make it work? And so she joined us again in October 2020, and has ripped the organization apart in the best possible way, and found even the cracks I didn't know existed. And we're patching it all up and becoming a much stronger, much more resilient organization. I'll be honest, I think we would have really struggled to come out the other side of COVID-19 without her. So it's all about the people. It's whether however you're working, in person, remotely, big company, small company, it's the people you work with and choosing the right people to work with that I think make all the difference.
Yeah, and I think it was important. The reason I asked those questions of you and started from that point, I think it's important for people to understand how the Business Agility Institute got to where it is, right? So the next step of that is, what does the Business Agility Institute do? Does it just do business agility, or is it just an institute?
We don't. So it's interesting. So we've gone through multiple pivots and iterations. We started with a conference. The conference predates us. So it's like, okay, let's do more conferences, but we don't really want to do events. So we have members, and we knew that the library was important. And then after about 6 months, it's like, well, this library thing is really important. So we're building that out. And then, so we're getting more into content. We're getting more into reference cases. We're not going to do a framework. We'll never do a framework. There are too many frameworks out there already, and all frameworks are useful. No frameworks have the answer. So we wanted to inspire. We want people to go, huh, I didn't know you could do that. And to go, that's how you do it. So every piece of content is designed to do one of those two things. And funnily enough, so our biggest pivot happened at around the 6 to 9 month mark. Back in India, same conference, not with Ellen this time. I was sitting there listening to an amazing woman, Linda Rising, and she was giving a talk about growth mindset and what she was doing. And she made a sort of throwaway comment about the Agile industry, about the fact that so many things that we do are based on assumption, based on anecdote. We did it here, therefore it'll work for you there. And she was commenting that there wasn't a lot of research about the actual efficacy of this. And so I sort of sat back and like, yeah, that's actually true. Like, there's obviously some, and she deliberately misparaphrased another quote. The plural of anecdote is not data. Now, the correct quote is actually the plural of anecdote is data, but she was making a valid point with her quote. So it's like, all right, we do need an organization that can do research. And we don't do consulting. We don't do training. Right? We're an independent body. We're not tied to a certification model. Even though Ahmed is my co-founder, I see Agile as a sister organization, and we collaborate a lot. But Scrum Alliance is also a member of ours, and we collaborate with them as well. So we're not tied to a certification. We're not tied to a framework. We're business focused, not tech focused. So if there's anyone who can bloody well do research, it's us. So we dipped our toe in a few waters and go, okay, what do we do? How do we do this? And now we have 14 research teams around the world, either academically linked or industry linked, depending on the topic. And yeah, we're publishing pretty heavy hitting stuff. My favorite, which came out last May, was our paper on diversity, equity, and inclusion in Agile organizations. Long story short, inclusion goes down after a business agility or an Agile transformation, unless DE&I is an explicit part of it. Now, we have another piece of research that we haven't started yet, which is why. Our hypothesis is that it is based on the focus on culture fit. So Agile organizations talk about culture fit and all that kind of thing, which leads to monoculture, which leads to exclusionary behaviors for people who don't fit the mold. So that's the hypothesis as to why inclusionary behaviors go down. Now, it actually goes up if it's explicit, but sadly, we might talk about individuals and interactions, but it doesn't always come to fruition. So not all research is so gloomy. Obviously, there's a lot of positives. We're about to publish a piece of research with Agility Health, looking at hundreds of thousands of individuals and thousands of teams around the world, looking at what are the predictors of happiness, as well as what are the predictors of performance. And one of the things that we actually found is that the better the manager, the better the quality of a product. So we actually, and it's up to about 25%. So as manager competencies improve, quality improves by 25% and more. So it's really interesting stuff to see just how some of these behaviors that we know, or we believe are so effective in tech, and we believe are so effective in the rest of the business, actually, many of them actually, we've got the data now to prove it.
That's fantastic. And I think alongside that, and I'm going to throw you one out here, but I'm thinking, we've seen the rise of remote and / hybrid. Obviously, the remote agility framework, we have a stake in it. Thinking about how you work better, right? And that's our. But I would really like to see some research get up around that. That's really done properly. There's lots of bits and bobs of research around it at the moment. The effect of it, the effect of hybrid versus fully remote, etc. So I think there's some research to be done in that as well. Certainly something I'll chat to you when we finish this particular. So you saw it here. I raised it with Evan. Yeah, look, the other thing about the business agility is where do the round tables factor in? So talk a little bit about round tables for everyone.
One of the things that we've realized is that you have to meet people where they are. And so different audiences need different conversations. The Business Agility Conference, which keeps, we did number 5, obviously we didn't run it in 2021. We did run it in 2020, literally the very last conference. The pandemic was, I stood on stage and announced about 3 hours into day 1 that the World Health Organization had declared a pandemic. And that if people wanted to leave to get to the airport, they were definitely welcome to. That was a challenging few days.
Moment, yes.
But so we've had the Business Agility Conference, but that caters to people who, let's say they're inside the bubble. They get it. They're transformation leaders. They are executive coaches. They're business leaders. We're not teaching them anything they don't know, but we're giving them the tools and we're inspiring them with stories to reinforce many things. Now, obviously, we do get folk who are brand new. And we love them dearly. And if we find someone who's new and really doesn't know, it's like, I'm gonna sit down with you for 20 minutes and we're gonna have a chat, because that's important. But we have executives So if you're a top executive in an organization, the chief people officer, there's no way in hell you're going to a 2-day conference. That's not where they learn.
Yeah.
Execs will learn from other execs. So to meet them where they are, we started these executive forums, which were, in fact, we're actually running the one in Australia on August 2nd and 3rd. Which in fact I don't think I've actually announced it yet. I think you're the we've spoken to some of our members, but
you heard it first on all the remote.
But we've also then got the roundtables, because then there are people who they get it, but they really want to go deep into something. And some of these topics are really meaty, like corporate governance. How do you change governance structures inside an organization? And there's no 2-day class that's going to teach you that. But there are people who are taking a damn good crack. So let's bring all those people who are taking a crack at these meaty topics, bring them together and let them actually nut it out amongst themselves. And so that was the origin of the roundtables. So we've done roundtables on, like, how do you influence and inspire leaders? How do you light a fire under their asses? We've done roundtables on adaptive finance, which is a big topic. Like, that was like a series, like I think it was like 3 roundtables, same group for 3 sessions. But these are all wicked problems that some people have cracked, but there's no common pattern yet that will work. And so they're trying to discover what works. And, oh, that worked for you. I'll give that a try next week. Oh, that didn't work for me. How would you fix this little issue? And of course, you got those conversations. So we've also got meetups and chapters and all that. We have different ways of engaging with the community. And it all comes down to that principle of you have to meet people where they are.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. All right, I'm going to take a little bit of a sideways as I do. I think it's important for people to hear a bit about yourself, right? So I read your first book, and a lot of people probably don't know that book. Now, I didn't see it until a little later, but you were telling me that you wrote it about 2012, which was Directing the Agile Organization. So talk a little bit about that one for me.
So this is going to be really weird for an author to say, but I don't recommend anyone buys and reads that book. A lot. No, but I'll explain why. Because a lot has happened since 2012, obviously 10 years ago, and in an innovative space like business agility, that is a lifetime. Early on, and I mentioned I made mistakes when I first sort of became an executive. I was a crappy executive. I figured out this whole business agility thing, and it's like I tried some things, and I was lucky I didn't do it in the best way. Because what I did then, and what many organizations do as they're going through this like maturity curve, many organizations start here, is not business agility, but capital A, agile business. So where I started was, how do you take the principles, yes, but also the practices from Agile, Scrum. It wasn't Kanban at the time, though. I think it came in about that time.
Yeah, it was around that time.
Around then. Pair programming. How do you do pair work? How do you write a book pairing? Which is what Shane and I did with the second book. But this agile business, many organizations, when they're scaling agile outside tech, they do literally that. They scale capital A agile. And that was where I started as well, because it seemed, hey, Scrum worked for me here. Why wouldn't it work for me there? The truth is that as I learned more, as I evolved as a person, my experiences just went up. I realized that the agile part of it wasn't actually the relevant part. As I said, I was lucky. It worked for me in that context. But the agility, the changing the behaviors of an organization, not the practices, not the frameworks, but the behaviors of how people interact, changing the structures, changing the systems. The old saying, a bad system will break a good person. So make them good systems. You create agility in these spaces, whether you're using Scrum or not, doesn't matter. Then you've got an organization that can continue to achieve its purpose no matter what the future brings. And it took me a while to get to that point, and hopefully people can learn from my mistakes and sort of bypass the whole agile business mistake and land where things actually start working properly. But that's one of the reasons why it's like that first book. It's not business agility, it's agile. If I actually say, I don't use the word business agility in the book, it's agile business management. That's what I talk about throughout the book. Don't get me wrong, there's still good stuff in the book. This is not totally wrong. But do take it into account. That is a 10-year-old book.
It's the reason I bring it up. It's always interesting to see that journey that people, and that's why we had that journey there. Fast forward a tad, you wrote another book, of course, and you wrote it with one of both our great friends, and I've had him on this particular cast as well. Is the venerable and honourable Shane Hastie, as I would refer to him.
Shane is fantastic, isn't he? So we had great fun writing that book. The book, I instigated the book back in around 2015, 2016. I was working with an organization who was the antithesis of good practice when it comes to project management. No, let me rephrase that. They were very good at project management. Everything was a project.
Traditionally.
That's it. Every employee was a project manager. Every person who created value was a contractor. It came to a head when there was one project, which was upgrade Internet Explorer 7 to Internet Explorer 9. And it took 9 months of planning and prep and approvals to start, to do what was about 30 minutes worth of work and about another week or two of testing. That was it. And so working in this context is just like, and project is obviously now that it's a big thing, but like 2015 it wasn't heard of. So I started writing a series of articles, and Shane, who's amongst his many talents, he's also one of the editors for InfoQ. It's like, yes. Hey, I love these articles, can we publish them? It's like, yeah, absolutely. And then we published the articles. Like, do you want to write a book on this? And it's like, hell yes, let's do it. So yeah, he and I pair writing. Right? We sat. He's in New Zealand. I'm in Australia. The tools are there. The remote tools are there. So we wrote the book, and it was fun. Actually, my favorite chapter is actually the very first one, which is a history of project management. We actually trace project management back to about the 1600s, and you can see the fingerprints of history. From like the Industrial Revolution, scientific management, globalization, Agile. So you can see the fingerprints on history on like the profession of project management. And so now we call it #no projects, but of course projects still have a place. It's to push people to think that there are other ways, and there is work for which a project structure, a project metaphor is not appropriate. Yes. And the example that Shane and I use is that a bridge needs a project, because you can't add value to a bridge. And the cost of change is very high. Well, once concrete starts pouring, if you make a mistake, then out come the sledgehammers. Like, that's an expensive mistake. So there's no additional, once there's a very clear build and maintain. Once the bridge is built, you need to, your maximum value has been generated, your maximum value potential has been generated. Now it's just maintain it so you can actually keep the cars going across the bridge. That's a project, and that's a legitimate project. But in knowledge work and anywhere where the cost of change is low or ambiguity is high, anything that's agile suitable, anywhere where you can keep adding value, then an arbitrary project, like you end because the project says you end. It's like, no, if we keep going for another 6 months, we can triple the value in this because there's more that we can do. Why should we? Well, the project plan that was signed off by the CFO says that this is when you finish, and now the fund's been allocated to something else. Well, that other thing is worth 3 times less than what we're doing here, right? And organizations don't have the ability to reallocate funds. So it touches on business agility, obviously, because those funding models, adaptive funding models, are part of that product to product mindset as well. So yeah, great stuff. And I'll be honest, if any of your listeners are project managers, I'm not insulting you, but do think about other ways. Yep, that's the book.
And there's the book. Yeah, so we might reference the book because I don't think either of us did. It's called #No Projects, right? So Shane and Evan. There's a good reason I brought that up, not just for obviously to let people know that what you've been doing as well, but fast forward everything we've just talked about, and now we've hit remote/hybrid, and the effect on business agility, the effect on agility across the world. It's interesting to hear from your point of view, being very research driven and having those tendrils, how you see that's playing out now, where you see the place for remote/hybrid and agility in itself.
So let me say 3 things. 1, remote's here to stay. I don't think any of your listeners are going to disagree with that. 2, organizations need to be careful not to fall backwards. COVID was a motivating factor for a great many positive things. It was terrible. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have died, but organizations and individuals have used this as a catalyst to improve how they work, where they work, when they work, everything about their work. Now, problem is, as we start to emerge from COVID-19 and the pandemic, organizations are trying to figure out, do we go back to normal, right? Or a new, I hate the word new normal, right? But it's you've got, the risk we run is that organizations, the pendulum swings too far back the other way. Now, definitely the pendulum swung too far in one direction, and that we had no choice in the matter, right? But we don't want to swing all that way back. And so the risk, and we're seeing this in organizations around the world, of like, okay, everyone's back in the office 4 days a week. It's like, no, that's not how this works. Now, the third point is, about 2 weeks ago, I came back from New York from the 2022 Business Agility Conference, and America's more or less opened up. Like, we had people from all over the world, from Mexico, from Europe, from like the Netherlands and so forth. So it was a great event. It was a small event, but it was a great event. And I remember standing there before we opened and just watching people mingle, and just like they're hugging each other. They're like, we made it very clear up front that people had to be respectful of others' social distancing desires. And so like we sent out a message early on, like before the conference. It's like, all right, we're not going to mandate social distancing. Like, we don't have to. New York isn't mandating it, all that kind of thing. But please be respectful. It can everything from a wave, a handshake, to a hug. It's okay, but make sure the other person's okay with it. Like consent, basically, basic human decency. But like everyone went straight to that. Like everyone was hugging, like there was no social distancing. There was this almost like a release valve. And I remember just this well of just feeling and emotion going, it's like, I've missed this. I've worked from home since the Institute's an American organization. I live in Melbourne, so I've been remote ever since we started. But I'd forgotten how important these moments of connection were. And so this is not research, this is just how I feel. But I believe it is truly important for everyone who is working, especially remotely, to find those moments of connection. That doesn't mean you have to go to the office on Friday, every Friday.
Yeah.
Right? But it means that you need to find, and if not find, create opportunities to physically meet with your colleagues, your peers, once a month, once a week, whatever's right for you, in whatever cadence, in whatever mode is right for you. But I had forgotten how important that connection was until I was there, and so had most of the audience. This was not just a me thing. I'm not the only one who said it. People is like, I forgot how good this was. I forgot how important it was. And they're all going back to working remotely when they get back to the office, or most of them, or not home office, as the case may be. But they will remember those hugs, those handshakes, those connections. And that will give them energy for the next month or two, or hopefully not 2 years.
Yeah, well, I guess we will see about that. By the way, I'm not a fan of the new normal either. I call it the next normal, because I think
I like that.
there's a transition to normal. There'll be another transition to what we see as normal, etc., etc. Right? So, yeah. Look, we're very close to the end of our time, but I do want to touch on something else. And it was a chat that you and I are having previous to this, as I usually do with people that come on here. And it was talking about, you're very passionate about all of this. I know that from working with you and talking to you and conferencing with you. But where the passion born out is, where does that passion come from? And I think that's a very interesting thing to talk about, if you'd like to share that with us.
So I'll talk generically, then I'll talk personally. Every one of us, work is the biggest part of our life. We work more than we spend time with our family. That's not a criticism. That's just a statement of fact. And it's how it's always been for the last 1,000 years and more. In fact, we're actually working less now than we were 100 years ago, which is good. But it's still the biggest part of our life. So if it's the biggest part of our life, it should be the best part of our life. Anything less is a waste of human potential. Now, for me, that human potential is manifest in my daughter. So I'm a single father. She's 9 years old and is everything to me. So a huge part of what drives me here is to make sure that when she gets her first job in Australia, 9 months, or whenever she wants, she was honestly saying, like, we went to McDonald's the other day, it's like, I want to work here. And it's like, oh, to be young.
Yes.
So wherever she wants to work, whether that is McDonald's, a library, or an astronaut or a scientist, right? That job should be empowering. It should fill her, it should make her feel rewarded. And I don't mean financially, I mean like as a whole self. And that whole damn thing, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, doesn't matter whether you're like flipping burgers or whether you're flying to the moon. You need to have an organization that creates that space. And anything less is a waste of human potential, and me, a waste of my daughter's potential. And I do not want to see that.
That's a fantastic insight, and we're at the end of our time, but I thank you for sharing that with us, because I think as a father as well of children, that it's the same for me. I didn't think about it until we were talking about it, but it really is. Well, why do we do what we do? We want to improve and make things better for our own, right, as well as others. So thank you for that. Again, thank you for the time that you've spent with us today. Evan, how do people get involved with the Business Agility Institute and yourself?
Absolutely. So go to businessagility.institute. Yes, .institute is a top-level domain. I regret it sometimes because I don't know where the I's and the T's stop, and I type it daily. Become a member. It's $50 to become an individual member. Join an event, join a conference, just participate. Volunteer for some of our research. Put your hand up and say, hey, how can I help? Where does the community need me? If you want to chat to me personally, LinkedIn's probably the easiest. Just connect with me on LinkedIn. Tell me that you heard me on this podcast. I don't connect with everyone randomly. So if you don't tell me where you're from, I may not always accept the connection, but if you do, I will.
Yeah, he's pretty good like that. I tell you, he accepted mine. So,
and I've regretted it ever since.
It's been a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for being on all the remote things. If you're listening to this and you really enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, amplify. Also, don't forget that we now have a community, a remote agility framework community, Remote AF, on circle.io. You can actually access that by going to our website and joining us. And there's lots of conversations on there as well. Evan, again, thank you for being on all the remote things.
Thank you. Pleasure was mine.